Stand at the base of Devil's Tower in Wyoming. Look up, 865 feet of stone rising from the prairie. Columns, thousands of hexagonal columns bundled together like a massive geometric sculpture. Perfect hexagons, not pentagons, not heptagons, not irregular shapes you'd expect from random geological processes. Hexagons. The official explanation is simple. Volcanic plug. Magma cooled slowly underground. As it cooled, it contracted. Contraction created fractures. Fractures formed hexagonal columns because that's the most efficient way for cooling material to relieve stress. Same reason mud cracks form polygons when it dries. Physics. Geology. Understood. Except here's the problem with that explanation. Hexagons are also what living systems create. Beehives are hexagonal because hexagons are the most efficient way to pack circular cells with minimal wasted space. That's biological optimization. Evolution found the best solution through millions of years of trial and error. And when you look at epithelial tissue under a microscope, the cells arrange themselves in hexagonal patterns. Not because someone designed them that way, because hexagonal packing is the most stable, most efficient arrangement for biological structures under pressure. That's cellular organization. That's life optimizing itself. So Devil's Tower has the same hexagonal structure that biological systems use. Giant's Causeway in Ireland, same hexagonal columns. Svartafoss waterfall in Iceland, hexagonal columns. Fingal's cave in Scotland, hexagonal basalt. Devil's Postpile in California, perfect hexagons. All over the world, same structure, same geometric precision, and we're told this is volcanic cooling. Random geological processes just happen to create the exact same pattern that life uses for optimal structural efficiency. If we found this pattern on Mars, we'd call it potential evidence of biological activity. We'd send rovers to investigate. We'd want to know if something living created this structure. But here on Earth, where we know life exists, we see the same pattern and call it coincidence. Call it geology, call it anything except what it looks like. What if we're wrong? What if these formations aren't geological at all? What if they're biological? What if what we're looking at isn't ancient lava that happened to cool in biologically optimal patterns? What if we're looking at fossilized tissue from organisms so large that we can't recognize them as living things anymore? What if mountains aren't mountains? What if they're bodies? What if the landscape itself is a graveyard of titans we've forgotten how to see? Let me show you what happens when you stop assuming geology and start looking at anatomy. Heart Mountain, located in northwestern Wyoming, named for its shape because when you look at it from certain angles, it looks like a heart. Not vaguely heart-shaped, remarkably similar to a mammalian heart. 4-chambered structure. Visible divisions where ventricles would be. And if you look closely at the surface, you can see patterns. Branching patterns like veins, like the vascular system that would supply blood to cardiac tissue. The geological explanation is that this is a detached block of sedimentary rock that slid along a fault line. The heart shape is coincidental. The branching patterns are erosion channels. Water flowing over millions of years carved those patterns. Random. Meaningless. But erosion is random. Water doesn't preferentially carve patterns that precisely match biological vascular systems. Water follows gravity and rock resistance. It creates dendritic patterns, sure, but not organized patterns that correspond to specific anatomical structures. Look at an actual mammalian heart. The vascular system branches in a specific way. Main arteries divide into smaller arteries. Those divide into arterioles. Those divide into capillaries. It's a hierarchical branching system optimized for delivering blood to every cell. The pattern isn't random, it's functional. It's designed by evolution to maximize efficiency. Now look at Heart Mountain. The branching patterns on its surface follow the same hierarchical organization. Main channels dividing into smaller channels dividing into tiny channels. The same optimization. The same functional structure. And it's not just surface features. Geological surveys of Heart Mountain show internal structure. The mountain isn't solid. It has chambers. Cavities. Geologists explain these as natural voids in the sedimentary layers, but the organization of those cavities follows a pattern. They're not randomly distributed. They're arranged in a way that corresponds to the internal chambers of a heart. 4 main cavities, connected by channels, exactly where ventricles and atria would be in a 4-chambered mammalian heart. The size is what prevents recognition. A blue whale heart weighs about 400 pounds. It's roughly 5 feet across. That's the largest heart in any living animal. Heart Mountain is thousands of times larger. If you scale up a whale heart by a factor of 1,000, you get something approximately the size of Heart Mountain. And if there was a creature proportional to that heart, it would be 8 to 10,000 feet tall. That sounds impossible, and maybe it is. But let's not dismiss it based on scale alone. Let's look at the structure, because structure tells us whether something is biological or geological. Random processes create random structures. Biological processes create optimized structures, and Heart Mountain's structure is optimized exactly the way cardiac tissue is optimized. The layers within the mountain correspond to the layers of heart tissue. There's an outer layer that geologists identify as one type of sedimentary rock, then a middle layer of different composition, then an inner layer, 3 distinct layers, just like a heart has 3 layers. Epicardium on the outside, myocardium in the middle, endocardium on the inside, different tissue types serving different functions. And Heart Mountain has 3 layers of different mineral composition in the same arrangement. Geologists say this is normal sedimentary layering, different minerals deposited at different times. But why would sedimentary layers arrange themselves in a pattern that precisely matches cardiac anatomy? Why would erosion carve vascular patterns on the surface that match the blood supply system? Why would internal voids organize themselves into 4 chambers connected by channels exactly where a heart's chambers would be? One explanation requires multiple incredible coincidences. The other explanation requires accepting that fossilization can occur at scales we don't usually recognize. I'm not saying the second explanation is definitely correct. I'm saying it fits the evidence better than the first. Move from cardiac tissue to pulmonary tissue. Across the American Southwest, there are rock formations that geologists call tafoni weathering. These are surfaces covered in small cavities, honeycomb patterns, thousands of small holes arranged in organized clusters. The official explanation is that salt crystallization and wind erosion create these cavities. The salt expands, creates stress, rock fragments fall out. Over time, this creates the honeycomb pattern. But look at those patterns closely. They're not random. The cavities are approximately the same size. They're evenly distributed. They're organized into clusters with clear boundaries. That's not what random weathering does. Random processes create random results. Variable cavity sizes, irregular distribution, no organization. Now look at lung tissue under a microscope. Alveoli, the tiny air sacs where oxygen exchanges with blood. They're arranged in honeycomb patterns, approximately the same size, evenly distributed, organized into clusters called alveolar sacs. The structure is optimized for maximum surface area. More surface area means more gas exchange. Evolution optimized this structure over millions of years. The rock formations show the same optimization, same size uniformity, same distribution pattern, same clustering organization. The only difference is scale. Alveoli are microscopic. These rock cavities are centimeters to inches across, but the organizational principle is identical. And it's not just surface features. Some of these formations show internal structure. Channels running through the rock connecting the cavities, like bronchioles connecting alveolar sacs. A hierarchical distribution system. Air flows through main channels, divides into smaller channels, reaches the cavities where gas exchange would occur. Geologists call these channels erosion patterns, but erosion doesn't create hierarchical distribution systems. Erosion creates drainage patterns following gravity. What we see in these formations is distribution, not drainage. The channels branch like bronchial tubes, not like rivers. If you've never seen lung tissue, and you encounter a rock formation with perfect alveolar structure at 1,000 times normal scale, what's more likely? That wind and salt coincidentally created a structure optimized for gas exchange? Or that you're looking at fossilized pulmonary tissue you don't recognize because the scale is wrong? Now look at what geologists call columnar basalt. The hexagonal columns I mentioned earlier. The official explanation is cooling magma. But let's compare the structure to bone tissue, specifically cortical bone, the dense outer layer of bones that provides strength. Under a microscope, cortical bone shows a specific structure, osteons. These are cylindrical units running parallel to each other through the bone. Each osteon is a channel surrounded by concentric layers of mineralized tissue. The channels carry blood vessels and nerves. The layered structure provides strength while maintaining the blood supply. Osteons are arranged in parallel because that's the optimal structure for resisting compression and tension along the bone's length. Evolution found this solution. It's not random, it's engineered through natural selection for maximum strength with minimum weight. Columnar basalt shows parallel cylinders, hexagonal cross-section. Each column is a structural unit. The columns run parallel to each other. The structure provides maximum strength for the formation. It's the same optimization principle, the same parallel organization, the same geometric efficiency. The difference is composition. Bone is calcium phosphate. Basalt is solidified magma, but composition doesn't determine structure. Structure determines function, and the structure of columnar basalt serves the same function as the structure of cortical bone. Load-bearing, strength, efficiency. If bone tissue were completely replaced with minerals through fossilization, it would still maintain its structure. Osteons would become mineral cylinders. The parallel organization would remain. The hexagonal packing would remain, because that's the most stable configuration. And if that fossilization occurred at 1,000 times normal scale, you'd get something that looks exactly like columnar basalt. Fossilization doesn't change structure. It changes composition. Organic molecules are replaced with minerals. Cell by cell, molecule by molecule. The shape remains. The organization remains. That's why we can recognize fossilized dinosaur bones as bones even though they're now stone. The structure tells us what it used to be. So when we see rock formations with cardiac structure, pulmonary structure, skeletal structure, we have two options. Either random geological processes coincidentally created structures optimized by millions of years of biological evolution, or we're looking at fossilized biological tissue we don't recognize because the scale is enormous. The scale is what breaks our pattern recognition. Humans recognize anatomy at human scale. We can look at a dog's heart and recognize it as a heart. We can look at an elephant's heart and still recognize the structure. But scale that up 1,000 times and our brains stop seeing anatomy. We see geology instead, not because the structure changed, because our perception changed. There's an experiment you can do. Take a microscope image of cardiac tissue showing the vascular branching pattern. Don't label it. Show it to someone and ask what they see. They'll see branches, networks, organization. Now show them an aerial photograph of Heart Mountain showing the surface branching patterns. Don't label it. Ask what they see. They'll see the same thing. Branches, networks, organization. The patterns are identical. The only difference is scale and context. If I tell you one is biological and one is geological, you see them differently. But the structures themselves are the same. That's what I'm asking you to consider. Not to believe, just to look. Compare the structures. Ignore what you're told they are. Look at what they actually look like. And ask yourself this question. If tissue can fossilize at normal scale, why can't it fossilize at larger scale? What law of physics prevents soft tissue fossilization from occurring in organisms larger than anything currently living? There isn't one. Fossilization is about chemistry, not size. It's about mineral replacement of organic material under specific conditions. Those conditions can occur at any scale. The conditions required for soft tissue fossilization are specific. Rapid burial in sediment, anaerobic environment to prevent bacterial decomposition. Mineral-rich water percolating through the tissue. Pressure to facilitate mineral replacement. Time for the chemical process to complete. Those conditions are rare for normal-sized organisms. Most dead animals decompose before they're buried deeply enough. But there's one scenario where those conditions would occur globally and rapidly: a catastrophic flood. Global-scale flooding would bury everything under sediment, rapidly. The weight of sediment would create enormous pressure. Water saturated with dissolved minerals would permeate everything, and anaerobic conditions would exist beneath the sediment layer. That's exactly the scenario required for massive-scale soft tissue fossilization. And that scenario is described in the historical record, not as geology, as catastrophe, as the flood, documented in over 270 cultures worldwide, described in texts that predate modern geological theory by thousands of years, dismissed as mythology by modern science. But what if it wasn't mythology? What if it was memory? If organisms of enormous size existed before a global flood, and that flood buried them under sediment, and that sediment became rock, we would expect to find exactly what we do find: rock formations with anatomical structure, tissue fossilized at scales too large to recognize as biological, mountains that are actually bodies, landscapes that are graveyards. Look at the position of these formations. Devil's Tower stands vertical, like something died standing up and was buried so rapidly it remained upright as it fossilized. Heart Mountain lies on its side, like something collapsed and was covered before it could decompose. These aren't random orientations, they're death positions, the positions you'd expect from catastrophic burial. Look at the sedimentary context. Many of these formations aren't pure igneous rock. They're embedded in sedimentary layers: sandstone, shale, limestone, rocks that form from sediment deposited in water. The igneous formations are surrounded by evidence of water deposition. That's consistent with catastrophic flooding. Massive organisms buried in flood sediment. Some tissue mineralized differently than others, creating what looks like igneous intrusions but might be differential fossilization of different tissue types. Look at the global distribution. Formations with suspicious anatomical structure aren't isolated to one region. They appear worldwide. North America has abundant examples. Europe has Giant's Causeway, Fingal's Cave, formations in Iceland and Scandinavia. Asia has columnar formations in China and Siberia. Australia has basalt columns. South America has formations in the Andes. This is a global phenomenon, not local geology. Global burial. The timeline matches catastrophic burial. If the flood occurred several thousand years ago, and these formations are the fossilized remains of organisms buried in that event, we'd expect the rock to date to roughly the same period. And when you look at the radiometric dating of basaltic formations, there's an interesting pattern. Many date to what geologists call the Holocene, or recent geological periods, not ancient. Relatively recent in geological terms, thousands to tens of thousands of years, not millions. Geologists explain this as recent volcanic activity, but what if it's not volcanic? What if it's fossilization that occurred in a geologically recent catastrophic event? The dating would be the same. The interpretation would be different. Here's what we know happened based on physical evidence. Something created enormous pressure on these formations. The rock shows stress patterns, fracturing, deformation. That's consistent with massive weight, the weight of sediment piled on top during rapid burial, the weight you'd expect from catastrophic deposition. Something created the conditions for rapid mineralization. The rock contains mineral compositions that form in water. That's consistent with water-saturated sediment, the conditions you'd expect from flood burial. Something created organized internal structures, chambers, channels, voids arranged non-randomly. That's consistent with organs, with anatomy, with biological origin, not consistent with random volcanic processes. And something happened that killed everything simultaneously, because these formations appear globally in the same geological layers. That's consistent with global catastrophe, with sudden mass death, with the flood scenario, not consistent with slow geological processes over millions of years. I know the immediate objection. Creatures that large are impossible. The square cube law says that as an organism increases in size, its volume and weight increase faster than its strength. Eventually, you reach a size where the organism can't support its own weight. Bones would break. Muscles couldn't move the mass. Heart couldn't pump blood through a body that large. It's physically impossible. Except that objection assumes current atmospheric conditions, current gravity, current oxygen levels, and we know those have changed. Amber preserves ancient air in bubbles. Scientists have analyzed that air. Air from different geological periods shows different compositions, specifically higher oxygen content. Significantly higher. Modern atmosphere is 21% oxygen. Air bubbles in amber from certain periods show 30 to 35% oxygen. More oxygen means more efficient respiration. More efficient respiration means organisms can sustain larger body sizes. The metabolic limitation disappears when oxygen is abundant. And 35% oxygen is abundant enough to support organisms significantly larger than anything living today. There's also evidence of higher atmospheric pressure in the past. The vapor canopy theory suggests pre-flood Earth had a water vapor layer in the upper atmosphere. This would increase surface atmospheric pressure. Higher pressure means more oxygen per breath, even at the same percentage composition. It means less perceived gravitational stress. It means gigantism becomes viable. We don't have to speculate about whether higher oxygen and pressure allow larger organisms. We have evidence. Fossil evidence. The Carboniferous period had oxygen levels around 35%, and that period produced the largest terrestrial arthropods ever. Meganeura. Dragonflies with 70-centimeter wingspans. Arthropleura. Millipedes 8 feet long. These creatures are impossible under current conditions. The respiratory system of arthropods can't deliver enough oxygen to sustain those sizes in 21% oxygen atmosphere, but they existed. We have the fossils, which proves that atmospheric conditions were different. And if conditions allowed impossible insects, why not impossible reptiles? Impossible mammals? Impossible humanoids? We call them dinosaurs. We accept that 100-ton sauropods existed, even though the physics seem impossible. We accept that Argentavis magnificens, a bird weighing 70 kilograms with a 7-meter wingspan, could fly even though modern birds that size can't. We accept the evidence because we have the fossils. We work backward from the evidence to figure out what conditions must have existed. So why not do the same with these formations? We have structures that look like fossilized organs at enormous scale. Instead of dismissing them as impossible, why not work backward? What conditions would need to exist for organisms that large to be viable? Higher oxygen, higher pressure, different atmospheric composition. All things we have evidence for in the past. And here's the important point. I'm not claiming creatures that large exist now. I'm claiming they existed then, before the flood, before atmospheric conditions changed, before whatever catastrophe altered the planet and made gigantism unsustainable. After the flood, the vapor canopy collapsed. Atmospheric pressure dropped. Oxygen percentage decreased. And anything that required those conditions to survive would die. That explains the extinction. It explains why we don't see creatures that large today. It explains why the fossil record shows larger organisms in older layers and progressively smaller organisms in more recent layers. Not evolution toward larger size. Devolution after catastrophe destroyed the conditions that sustained large size. The creatures died, the conditions that sustained them disappeared, and their bodies were buried in the sediment of the catastrophe that killed them. That's what the evidence shows. That's what the global distribution shows. That's what the anatomical structures show. But mainstream geology doesn't accept this interpretation. Why? Not because the evidence doesn't support it, because the implications are unacceptable. Because accepting catastrophic burial means accepting a global flood. Because accepting a global flood means geological uniformitarianism is wrong. And uniformitarianism is the foundation of modern geology. Charles Lyell established the uniformitarian principle in the 1830s, the idea that present geological processes are sufficient to explain all past geological features. That Earth's history is slow, gradual change over millions of years. No catastrophes, no floods, just slow erosion, slow deposition, slow change. This became geological orthodoxy. It's taught as fact. It's the framework for all geological interpretation. But Lyell wasn't responding to evidence. He was responding to catastrophism. Georges Cuvier, the father of paleontology, had argued based on fossil evidence that Earth experienced periodic catastrophes, mass extinctions, rapid burial, sudden changes. The fossil record supported catastrophism, but catastrophism had theological implications. It supported biblical narratives, and Lyell wanted geology to be secular, independent of religious text. So Lyell created uniformitarianism not as a scientific conclusion, but as a philosophical position. He decided catastrophes couldn't have happened because allowing catastrophes would support religious narratives. And geology has maintained that position for 200 years. Not because the evidence supports it, because the alternative is unacceptable. Look at what happens when geologists encounter anomalous formations. Structures that don't fit uniformitarian explanation. They invent ad hoc explanations. Heart Mountain is a detached block that slid along a fault, even though the mechanics of that slide are physically impossible at the required speed. Devil's Tower is a volcanic plug, even though there's no evidence of the surrounding volcano that should exist. Columnar basalt is cooling magma, even though the crystallization patterns don't match pure igneous formation. Every anomaly gets explained away, not by better evidence, by creative interpretation. Because accepting that these formations might be biological would require rejecting uniformitarianism. And rejecting uniformitarianism would mean admitting Cuvier was right. Catastrophes happened. The flood was real. The biblical account has geological support. That's intellectually unacceptable to secular academia. So the evidence is reinterpreted to fit the paradigm instead of changing the paradigm to fit the evidence. There's also economic motivation. Modern geology supports industries worth trillions. Oil exploration is based on uniformitarian models of how petroleum forms. Slow accumulation of organic material. Millions of years of pressure. Specific geological conditions. If catastrophic burial can create petroleum deposits rapidly, the entire exploration model is wrong. Mining industries rely on uniformitarian dating to locate mineral deposits. If the timeline is wrong, the predictions are wrong. Nobody wants to fund research that might prove their industry's foundation is incorrect. So research that questions uniformitarianism doesn't get funded. Papers that suggest catastrophic origins don't get published. Not because peer review finds flaws, because peer review rejects based on ideological grounds. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Becomes a weapon to dismiss any evidence that challenges orthodoxy. Occasionally, geologists do publish observations of anomalous structures, articles noting unusual formations or patterns resembling biological organization. These articles appear in legitimate journals. They document real observations, but they never receive follow-up research. Nobody investigates further. The observations are noted and then ignored. Not refuted, not disproven, simply forgotten, because there's no institutional support for pursuing implications that lead to catastrophism. I'm not claiming there's a conspiracy. I'm claiming there's a paradigm. And paradigms are self-reinforcing. People who accept the paradigm get funding, get published, get academic positions. People who question the paradigm get marginalized. Their research isn't funded. Their papers aren't accepted. Their careers stall. Not because their work is bad, because their conclusions are unacceptable. That's how paradigms maintain themselves. Not through conspiracy, through institutional bias masked as rigor. But the evidence remains. You can look at it yourself. Nobody can stop you from comparing microscope images of tissue to photographs of rock formations. Nobody can prevent you from noticing that the patterns match. Nobody controls your perception. Here's what you can verify independently. Get images of cardiac tissue under microscope. Find the vascular branching patterns. Then get aerial photographs of Heart Mountain. Compare them. The patterns are identical. Same hierarchical branching, same optimization, same structure. That's observable. That's not interpretation. That's direct visual comparison. Get images of alveolar tissue, the honeycomb structure of lungs. Then find photographs of tafoni weathering formations. Compare them. Same honeycomb pattern, same size uniformity, same organizational clustering. That's not opinion, that's pattern recognition. Get images of cortical bone showing osteon structure, then get images of columnar basalt showing hexagonal columns. Compare them. Same parallel organization, same geometric packing, same structural optimization. That's measurable. That's not belief, that's geometry. Do these comparisons yourself. Don't trust me. Don't trust geologists. Look at the structures. The patterns either match or they don't. If they match, you have to explain why. Coincidence is possible. But when the same coincidence repeats globally across multiple tissue types, coincidence becomes statistically unlikely. You can also verify distribution. Look at maps showing locations of columnar basalt formations worldwide. They're everywhere, every continent. Consistent structure. If these were independent volcanic events, the consistency is remarkable. If these are fossilized remains of similar organisms, the consistency is expected. Same species, same anatomy, same structural patterns. You can verify the geological context. Look at what rock layers surround these formations. Many are embedded in sedimentary rock. Sandstone, limestone, shale. Rock types that form from water-deposited sediment, that's inconsistent with volcanic origin. Volcanoes don't erupt through sedimentary layers and leave those layers intact around them. But burial of large objects in sediment would create exactly what we see. The volcanic formation surrounded by sedimentary rock because both formed during the same depositional event. You can verify internal structure. Geological surveys document cavities and channels inside formations like Heart Mountain. Those surveys are public. The data shows organized internal structure, chambers connected by channels, non-random organization. Geologists interpret this as natural voids, but the organization matches anatomical structure. That's verifiable by comparison to known anatomy. What you cannot easily verify is composition at the cellular level. That would require access to samples and laboratory analysis, and that's where institutional control matters. You can't get samples from protected geological sites. You can't run analyses without funding and facility access, and funding doesn't support research questioning uniformitary in geology. So the microscopic analysis that might definitively prove biological origin doesn't happen. Not because it's impossible, because it's not funded. But absence of that analysis doesn't disprove the hypothesis. It just means we lack complete evidence. And in the absence of complete evidence, we look at available evidence. Structure, distribution, context, pattern, consistency. All of those support biological origin better than they support random geological coincidence. The strongest evidence is the global pattern. If these formations were random volcanic features, they would vary. Different structures in different locations, regional variation based on local geology. But they don't vary. Columnar basalt looks the same in Iceland and California and Scotland and Australia. That's not regional geology, that's global consistency. The kind of consistency you expect from similar organisms, not from independent geological processes. And there's the timing. Many of these formations date to similar periods, not millions of years apart. Thousands, within the same broad geological epoch that's consistent with simultaneous burial, with catastrophic event affecting the globe, not with millions of years of independent volcanic activity that just happened to produce identical structures worldwide. I want to be clear about what I'm claiming and what I'm not claiming. I'm not claiming I can prove beyond doubt that these formations are fossilized titans. I'm claiming the evidence is consistent with that interpretation, more consistent than with conventional geological explanation. The structures match anatomy. The distribution suggests global event. The geological context supports catastrophic burial. The atmospheric evidence makes large organisms viable in the past. Is it possible these are all coincidences? That volcanic processes coincidentally created anatomically precise structures? That erosion coincidentally carved patterns matching vascular systems? That global distribution is coincidental despite structural uniformity? Yes, it's possible. Coincidence is always possible. But at some point, the number of required coincidences becomes implausible. And when an alternative explanation requires fewer coincidences, it deserves consideration. The alternative explanation is catastrophic fossilization of organisms larger than modern biology considers possible. That requires accepting three things. First, that atmospheric conditions in the past supported much larger organisms. We have evidence for that. Second, that a global catastrophe buried everything rapidly. We have historical accounts of that. Third, that fossilization can occur at scales we don't normally recognize as biological. We have no reason to believe fossilization has size limits. Those three things are less extraordinary than the coincidences required by conventional geology. That's why I find the biological interpretation more compelling. Not because I want it to be true, because the evidence fits better. And here's the implication that matters. If these formations are fossilized organisms, then human history is longer and stranger than we're taught. Giants weren't mythology. They were real. They were so large, we can't recognize their remains as biological. They died in a catastrophe that changed atmospheric conditions and made such size impossible afterward. And the memory of that catastrophe survived in every culture as the story of a great flood. That would mean ancient texts describing giants before the flood were literally accurate, not metaphorical, not exaggerated, literal. There were giants, they were titans, and when you look at a mountain, you might be looking at one of their hearts. Fossilized, mineralized, preserved in stone, waiting for someone to recognize what it actually is. You don't have to believe that, but you can look, you can compare the patterns, you can see the structures, you can verify the distribution, and you can ask yourself which explanation makes more sense. Random coincidence creating biological precision worldwide, or biological remains fossilized at a scale we're not accustomed to recognizing. I know which one the evidence supports. Look at Heart Mountain. Look at the vascular patterns. Look at the chamber structure. Look at the anatomical precision. And then tell me that's random erosion. Tell me that's coincidental. Tell me that's anything except what it looks like. It looks like a heart, because it is a heart. Just not the size of any heart from any creature we know. A heart from something enormous. Something that lived when atmospheric conditions made that size viable. Something that died in a catastrophe that buried it so rapidly it fossilized with soft tissue intact. Something we forgot existed because the scale breaks our ability to see it. The Titans were real. Their bodies became the landscape, and we walk past them every day, calling them mountains, never realizing we're walking through a graveyard of creatures so large that we've forgotten they were alive. The evidence is there. The patterns are measurable. The structures are verifiable. What we do with that evidence is a choice. We can dismiss it because it contradicts what we've been taught, or we can examine it honestly and let the evidence lead where it leads. Geology says these are rocks. Anatomy says these are organs. Catastrophe explains both. The flood buried titans. Time fossilized them. Erosion revealed them. And now we have to decide whether we're looking at mountains or monsters, at geology or biology, at coincidence or evidence. I'm looking at a heart. What do you see?